You learn, if you fly the crossing lanes long enough, that you are not the only one of you. Not in the way the recruiting posters mean it, all brave men shoulder to shoulder. I mean the literal thing. Out here at the seam of the worlds where one reality lies against the next like pages pressed in a shut book, a man who does this work long enough starts to feel the others. The other versions of himself in the worlds a half step over. They are doing what he is doing near enough. They eat when he eats. They sleep badly when he sleeps badly. And when one of them dies, you feel it go through you like a cold current through a wire, and you never quite get warm again afterward. I had felt a lot of them go by the time the pod came in. My name is Adrian Voss, and for 30 years I kept the sill. That is what we called it, a relay station bolted to the flank of a dead comet at the edge of a crossing lane, out where the drift runs thickest. The comet had no name that anyone used. It was a black stone the size of a small moon, pitted and airless, and we had driven anchors into it and hung our little station off its side like a barnacle on a whale that had died a long time ago and would never rot because there was nothing out there to rot it. The sill was one pressurized ring, a docking cradle, a survey mast, and me. There had been others once. Budgets change. By the last years it was only me and the machines, and the drift going by outside the ports, slow and endless. The debris of 100 neighboring worlds sliding through the lane on its way from nowhere to nowhere. That is what a surveyor does if you have never met one. We log the drift. When two worlds lie close, things fall between them. Never people, the authorities were always very firm about that. Never people, only objects, only wreckage, only the loose unclaimed matter that slips through the seam when the seam thins. A crate, a hull plate, a frozen tank of somebody's water. It comes into the lane and it drifts, and men like me catalog it, tag it, and let it go on by, or bring it in if the authority wants it. It is quiet work. It is the kind of work they give to a man who has stopped being good for anything louder. I was good at the feeling part. That was my particular gift, and my particular curse. Some surveyors never sense the other worlds at all. For them the seam is just readings on a screen. I felt it like weather. I could stand at the port with my coffee going cold in my hand and feel the neighboring versions of the sill hanging in the dark a half step over, feel the other Adrian Vosses standing at their own ports with their own cold coffee, and it was not a comfort. It was a crowd of tired men, all of them me, all of them alone in the same way. The pod came in on a gray shift, at the back end of a long, dull month. I saw it on the master turn first, a small, dense signal drifting up the lane on the current, tumbling slow the way sealed things tumble. The size was wrong for wreckage, too regular, too whole. I let it come. When it crossed into the near range and the cameras caught it, I set down my cup. It was a life pod, a survival cradle, the kind of people build when they know a bad time is coming and they mean to send their small ones out ahead of it, sealed and sleeping into the dark, in the hope that the dark is kinder than what is behind them. It was not human make. The lines of it were wrong for us, too many curves, a shell of some pale nacreous material that caught the mast lights and threw them back soft. V-hewn work. I knew the V-hewn from the catalog. A cold world people, quiet few, most of their worlds long emptied. I had logged V-hewn wreckage before. Panels, hull scrap. Once a whole dead garden frame with the plants in it turned to frost. I had never logged a V-hewn pod with the light still on. There was a light, a small steady amber point in the pod's flank, the telltale that means the cradle inside is holding, that the systems are drawing power, that whatever is sealed in there is still under care. In every V-hewn pod I had ever seen, that light was dark, cold, long gone out. The cradles came into the lane already failed, already too late, and I logged them and let them drift and did not think too hard about what had been inside, because a man cannot carry all of it and keep working. And here is the part I have to tell you plainly, because it is the whole spine of this thing. I had seen this pod before. Not this one, but this one. When you feel the other worlds the way I felt them, you do not get pictures exactly. You get pressure and grief and a kind of certainty in the body that runs ahead of the mind. And when that pod came up the lane with its light burning, every version of me in every world a half step over went still at the same instant, and I felt it, I felt them recognize it. This had happened to us before, many times. In world after world after world, a V-hewn pod had come up this same lane, and in world after world the light had been dark, and we had logged it and let it go, and something small had died in the drift a long time before we ever saw it, and we had felt it die and gotten a little colder and flown on. 100 of us, more, all the near versions of one tired man, and all of us had buried this child, over and over, in the only way the drift lets you bury anything, which is to look at the sealed cold shell and log its number and let the current take it on. But this time the light was on. I want you to understand that I did not decide anything standing there. There was nothing to decide. My hands were already moving. I brought the pod in. Regulations say you range a drift object, you tag it, you hold it in the outer cradle, and you wait for the authority to tell you what it is worth. You do not bring an unlogged object through the seals into the pressurized ring. You do not, under any circumstances, open it. I brought it through the seals and into the ring, and I had the grapple set it down on the deck of my own quarters before the cold had even come off the shell, and I put my bare hands on it. It was not as cold as I expected. That was the first thing that told me the light was not lying. Somewhere in that shell, something was making heat, spending itself to make heat, and had been spending itself for a long time, for longer than any cradle is built to last. The V-hewn build well, but nothing builds that well. Whatever was keeping that child was down to its last reserves. I could feel it the way you feel a fire that has burned to the final coals, still warm. But you know, that if you leave it another hour it will be gray ash and you will never get it back. I found the seal. V-hewn cradles are meant to be opened by V-hewn hands, and there were no V-hewn hands within 1,000 worlds of that comet, only mine, thick and scarred and human, and I worked the seal the way you work anything you have never seen before and cannot afford to break. Slowly, listening, feeling for the give. It opened with a sigh of cold air, and a smell like frost and something faintly green, like the inside of a thing that had once been alive and growing. She was small. I will not give you a measure, because there is no measure that would mean anything, and because it is not the kind of thing you reduce to a number when it is looking up at you. She was small and pale, the pale of the V-hewn, a colorless silver like the underside of ice, and she had the long, delicate ears of her people and eyes far too large for the little face, eyes the deep amber of the telltale light, and when the lid came up those eyes found me. She did not cry. The V-hewn do not, I think, cry the way we do, but she looked at me, and I felt the whole crowd of me a half step over go absolutely silent, all the other Adrians in all the other worlds, because none of them had ever gotten this far. None of them had ever had the pod come in with the light still on. This was new. In 100 worlds this had never once been new. "All right," I said, my voice came out rough. "All right, I've got you, you're all right." She did not understand the words. Of course she didn't. But she understood the tone, the way small things always understand the tone, and something in the set of her shoulders eased, and she let me lift her out of the cradle and into the warm, and she weighed almost nothing at all, and her small cold hand closed around 2 of my fingers and did not let go. I stood there in the middle of my quarters on a dead comet at the edge of the drift, holding a V-hewn child I had lost 100 times, and for the first time in 30 years I did not feel the cold current of them going through me. I felt something else. I felt all those other tired men lean in, close, holding their breath, watching through me, because I was the one who had gotten here, and they wanted to see what a man does when the thing he has failed at forever is suddenly, impossibly, still possible. I got her warm. That was the first work, and it was days of it. V-hewn run cold. Their cradle keeps them cool, not warm, and I had it wrong at first and nearly cooked her before I understood, and had to strip the heat back down and find the narrow band where she settled. She could take a kind of broth I made from the algae stock the station grew for air, thin and green, and she took it from a cup with both her hands wrapped around it, watching me over the rim with those amber eyes. She slept a great deal at first, the deep sleep of a thing that has been holding on for too long and has finally been allowed to let go a little. I did not sleep much. I sat up and watched the drift go by the port and felt the others watching with me. There is a particular quiet that comes over a station when there is a small thing sleeping in it. I had lived alone on the sill for years, and I had thought I knew every kind of silence the place could make, the hum of the air plant, the tick of the hull cooling on the shadow side, the long nothing of the drift. But this was a silence I had forgotten a station could hold. It was the silence of a place with two heartbeats in it instead of one. I would be at the mast, running the day's returns, and I would catch myself moving softer, setting a panel down without a sound, and I would understand that I had been doing it for an hour without noticing, the whole body of me arranged around the fact of her sleeping. She woke strange those first days. The Vihun do not surface from sleep the way we do, all at once, blinking. She came up slow in layers, the amber of her eyes clouding and clearing, and there was a stretch each time where she did not know where she was and her small hands would open and close on nothing, reaching, and I learned to be near for that, to put my hand where the reaching hands could find it, so that the first thing she took hold of on the way up out of sleep was something warm that stayed. After the third or fourth time she stopped reaching so hard. She had begun, I think, to expect the hand to be there. That is a small thing to build a trust on, and it is also the only thing any trust is ever built on, and I do not know a bigger one. I called her Wren after a few days because a man cannot go on saying the child to himself, and because the small brown bird of that name had followed my father around his garden when I was a boy, on a green world I would never see again, and it was the gentlest word I had. She did not know it was her name, but she learned the sound of it, and she would turn her head when I said it, and that was enough. That was more than enough. I learned her, the way you learn any creature you have no manual for. I learned that she went still when she was frightened, not loud, never loud but a whole body stillness, a going quiet of every part of her at once, and that the amber light in her eyes drew inward and dimmed when the stillness took her, the way a coal dims when you cover it. The first time I saw it I thought she was failing, and my heart went sideways in my chest, and I gathered her up without thinking and held her against the warm of me, and made the low, even sound a man makes without deciding to, the sound that has no words and never needed any, and the light came back up. That was the whole of the medicine, it turned out. Warmth and the low sound and the not going away. I had no others to give her, and it happened that they were the ones she needed. She was curious under the fear. That was the thing that told me she would live before any reading did. A dying thing turns inward and stops wanting the world. Wren wanted the world. She wanted to know what everything was. She would follow the run of a cable along the deck with one finger for the length of the whole ring. She would stand at the port with her palms flat against the cold, and watch a single piece of drift from the moment it came into the light until the moment it went out of it, tracking it with her whole small body, turning as it passed. She took the station apart with her eyes and put it back together, day after day, and I would find her in places I had not put her, having crossed the ring on her own to see a thing that had caught her. And each time she did it, I felt the crowd of me a half step over shift and settle, because none of them had ever watched a Vihun child cross a room to see a thing she was curious about. And it was, to men who had only ever logged the cold shells, a sight past the edge of what we had let ourselves want. The writ came 11 days after the pod. I knew it was coming. You always know. An unlogged object brought through the seals of a station is not a thing that goes unnoticed for long. The mast reports itself. The seals report themselves. The whole apparatus of the crossing authority is built to notice exactly the kind of thing I had done. I had 11 days because the authority is slow and the lanes are long. And then a courier drone came up the lane trailing its authority beacon and docked itself in my outer cradle without asking, and put a writ into my station's log, with the cold patience of a machine that has never in its life wondered whether it was doing right. I read it standing up, with Wren asleep in the crook of my arm. The writ was a reclamation order. It did not use the word child. It did not use the word vhun or cradle or pod or life. It named a drift object by the number I had been required to tag it with, and it declared that object to be cross-contamination, matter that had entered the lane from a neighboring world and therefore did not belong to this one. And it ordered that the object be returned to the drift and released down lane, out of the seam, into the deep between the worlds where such things are lost for good. There was a schedule. There was a compliance window. There was a line, near the bottom, in the flat language of the thing, that said the surveyor of record was to effect the release personally and confirm it, and that failure to comply would result in the forfeiture of the surveyor's crossing license and his removal from the sill. And there was a justification, because the authority always justifies. It said that the object was assessed as non-recoverable and non-viable. It said that, in the assessment of the crossing authority, cross-lane biological matter of this kind was, in 99 cases of 100, already lost by the time it reached the lane, and that the presumption of loss was therefore the standing presumption, and that the burden lay on the surveyor to prove otherwise, and that no such proof was recognized to exist. 99 of 100. I stood there and I almost laughed, and it was not a good laugh, because they were right. That was the terrible thing. They had never felt the other worlds the way I had. They were only reading their tables and their drift statistics, but the number was true. 99 of 100. I had lived the 99. I had felt every one of them. In world after neighboring world, this same pod had come up this same lane, and the light had been dark and the child had been lost, and the authority's cold table had that written into it as a law of the drift. The vhun pods come too late. They always come too late, and a thing that always comes too late is a thing you are permitted to let go. I did not sleep at all that night. I sat on the deck with my back against the cradle shell, and Wren woke and came and sat against me, the way she did now without being asked, and I looked at the writ where it hung in the log, cold and patient and certain, and I understood exactly what it was. It was not cruelty. That is what people never understand about the things that do the most harm. They are almost never cruel. There was no hate in that writ. There was no one on the far end of it who wanted Wren dead, no face that would have taken any pleasure in it. There was only a table, and a number, and a rule built on the number, and the rule ran the way water runs downhill, without malice and without mercy, and without ever once stopping to look at the thing it was about to carry off. It would release her into the drift the way it released a hull plate, because to the table she was a hull plate, a numbered object of a class the number said was already lost. And the awful arithmetic of it was that the table was not even wrong. About the 99 it was exactly right. It had only made the one mistake a table always makes, which is to believe that because a thing is true of nearly all, it is true of each. She leaned her head against my arm, and the amber light of her eyes moved over the writ she could not read, and I thought, they will have to come through me. Not through a wall, not through a gun. Through the one thing a table cannot average, which is a man who was there for all 99 and will not let the 100th be counted with them. But I had the 100th. That was the whole of it right there, and it took me the rest of that shift to understand what I was holding. The authorities' case was built on the drift statistics, on the truth that across the neighboring worlds this always ends one way. And I was the one man in all those worlds who could feel the neighboring worlds, who had the logs of them, who could stand up in front of the cold table and say, I know you're 99. I have lived your 99. And I am telling you that this is the 100th, and it is not the same, and your law does not reach it. I just had to make a machine believe it. I did not comply in the window. I want to be plain about that, because it is the hinge of everything and I will not dress it up. The window closed and I let it close, and the courier drone sat in my outer cradle radiating its patient beacon, and I sat inside the ring with Wren learning to walk the curve of the deck, one small hand always on the wall, the other reaching back for me, and I did not put her back in the drift. Those were long days, the days of the window. I will tell you what I did with them, because it is the part of the story I am least ashamed of, and the part that mattered most, though there is no drama in it. I read. I pulled every regulation the crossing authority had ever written on drift, on reclamation, on the disposition of cross-lane matter, and I read them the way a man reads them when a life turns on whether he has understood a sentence correctly. I had spent 30 years obeying those rules without ever once reading them close, the way you obey the weather, and now I went into them like a mine, with a lamp, looking for the one seam that would hold my weight. I found in the reading that the authority's own words were more careful than the authority's own habits. The writ spoke of the pod as cross-contamination, as loose unclaimed matter, as drift, but the regulations underneath the writ were full of qualifications the writ had not bothered to honor, because the writ had never expected to be argued with. Nobody argues with a table on a dead comet at the edge of the worlds. The whole apparatus was built on the assumption that the surveyor would do as he was told, because the surveyor always did, because the kind of man who ends up alone on the sill is precisely the kind of man who has stopped believing his objection matters. They had built a machine for a man who would not fight it. They had not built one for a man who had already lost this exact fight 99 times and had finally, at the end of everything, been handed the ground to make his stand on. So I made ready. I did not know if it would work. I had never done anything like it, and there was no one to ask, and the cost, if I understood the cost correctly, was everything I had left. But Wren would come and sit against me while I read, and put her small hand flat on the page-light as if she were helping hold the words down, and I would keep on. When the window closed, the authority escalated. That is the word they use. A second drone came, and this one carried an adjudicator, not a person. The authority does not send people out to the sill. That is what the sill is for, being the place people do not have to go, but an adjudicating instrument, a legal engine, a thing built to hear a surveyor's objection and weigh it against the writ and return a finding that would stand as the authority's own. It docked, and it opened a channel into my station, and it addressed me in the flat, courteous voice they give those things. It told me I was in violation. It told me the object was scheduled for release. It told me I had a right to be heard before final finding, and asked whether I wished to be heard. Yes, I said, I wish to be heard. I had spent the days getting ready. I had not slept, and I had barely eaten, and Wren had watched me with her amber eyes as I pulled 30 years of my own survey logs out of the station's deep memory and laid them out. I want to tell you what those logs were, because it matters. A crossing surveyor does not only log the drift he sees. He logs the seam itself, the readings of the neighboring worlds, the pressure of them, the drift correlations that tell you what is passing through the lane a half step over where you cannot see it directly. It is dry data. Nobody ever looks at it. It is required and archived and forgotten. In 30 years, I do not think a single one of my seam logs had ever been read by another living thing. But it was all there, 3 decades of it. And in that data, if you knew how to read it, and I was the man who knew how to read it, I was perhaps the only man in 100 worlds who knew how to read it. You could see the pod. Not this pod, the pattern of it. The V-hewn cradle coming up the lane, in world after neighboring world at intervals, again and again, always the same drift signature, always the same uplane track. My own logs, kept faithfully for 30 dull years, held the record of the 99. I had been writing down my own failures the whole time without knowing it. I want to enter my seam logs into the finding, I told the adjudicator. It allowed it. It had to. The right to be heard means the right to put your evidence in. It took my 30 years of data through the channel, and it processed them with the flat speed of its kind, and there was a silence, and I sat with Wren's small weight against my chest and waited to see whether a machine could be made to understand the thing I was about to try to make it understand. The submitted data, it said at last, confirms the authority's assessment. The drift signature corresponds to prior instances. In prior instances, the object was assessed non-viable. This supports the presumption of loss. It supports the presumption, I said. I know, that's why I'm giving it to you. I do not think the instrument had a way to be confused, but there was a pause, and I chose to believe it was that. I said, your writ rests on one thing, on the number, 99 of 100 you told me. Cross-lane biological matter is lost by the time it reaches the lane 99 times of 100, and so the standing presumption is loss, and I have to prove otherwise, and you say no such proof exists. That's your whole case, the number. That is the standing presumption, it agreed. Then let's talk about the number, I said. Because I'm the surveyor of record for this lane, and I have been for 30 years, and my seam logs are the source data the authority builds that number from. This lane, my readings, when your table says 99 of 100 V-hewn cradles come too late, it is counting my 99. I logged them, everyone. I felt everyone go dark. Your number is my grief, written down and averaged, and I am the one who wrote it. Nothing, the drift going by the port. So I am the one man who can tell you what the number leaves out, I said. A presumption of loss is a statement about the many. It is a fact about 99. It has never once been a fact about the 100th because there has never been a 100th. The pods came too late, all of them, until this one. This one came with the light on. This one is the case your number has never contained. You cannot use the 99 to rule on the 1, because the 99 is precisely the set of cases where the light was already out, and this is not that case. Your presumption doesn't reach it. Your presumption was never about a living charge. It was about drift, and this is not drift. The object entered the lane from a neighboring world, the adjudicator said. It is cross-lane matter by definition. I let that sit a moment. I had expected it and I had an answer for it, but I wanted the machine to hear the shape of what it had just said, if a machine can hear a shape. You keep saying object, I said. Let me tell you what the object did in the 30 years your table has been counting it. In every neighboring world where I felt it come up the lane, it had already failed by the time it reached me. The light was out. The charge was spent. And do you know when it failed? I do. I read my own logs this week, all 30 years of them, and the drift signatures tell you the failure point if you know how to read the decay, and I know how to read the decay. In world after world, that cradle failed early, light out before it was halfway up the lane, spent long before it reached my seals. 99 cradles, 99 early failures. That is your number. That is what non-viable means in your table, a thing that fails before it arrives. I shifted her against me. This one did not fail before it arrived. This one arrived with the light on. By your own definition, by the only definition your number has ever had, this is the one cradle in the set that is not non-viable, because non-viable meant failed before arrival. And this one did not fail before arrival. It arrived. It is here. It is warm. Your own table, read honestly, does not call this one lost. It calls this one the exception it was never built to see. There was a silence, and in the silence I understood something I had not planned to say, and I said it because it was true. You want to release her because she is like the 99. But the only way she is like them is that she came up the same lane in the same kind of shell. In the one way that matters, whether the light was still on when she got here, she is not like them at all. She is the opposite of them. And a rule that cannot tell the difference between a thing and its opposite is not a rule. It is just a habit with a number stapled to it. The object entered the lane from a neighboring world, the adjudicator repeated. It is cross-lane matter by definition. A hull plate that falls through the seam is cross-lane matter, I said. A crate, a tank of somebody's water, loose unclaimed matter, that's your own language from your own regulations. I read them all this week. Loose, unclaimed, that's what cross-contamination means. Matter that belongs to no one under no charge, adrift. Release it, no one is wrong because no one holds it. I shifted Wren against my chest. She stirred and settled. This cradle is not loose. This cradle is not unclaimed. This cradle was sent, sealed by hands that meant it, put into the dark under a living charge to keep the one inside alive. and it kept that charge across every world it crossed, for longer than any cradle is built to keep it, and the light never went out. That's not the signature of drift. Drift doesn't spend itself keeping something warm. Drift is dead. This was working. Right up until it reached my seals, it was working. A thing under an unbroken living charge is not unclaimed matter. It is a vessel carrying out its purpose. You do not have jurisdiction to reclaim a vessel that is still discharging the charge it was sealed under. You only have jurisdiction over the loose and the dead. And this is neither. The silence this time was longer. The charge you describe, the instrument said, was laid by parties in a neighboring world. Those parties are not present. The charge is unattended. No, I said, it's attended by me. I had known going in that this was the price. You do not get to argue a thing like this from a safe distance. The adjudicator's whole objection would come down in the end to this. A charge with no one standing behind it is just a wish, and wishes are not law, and an unattended pod is a loose pod, and a loose pod is drift, and drift gets released. The only way to close that gap was to stand behind the charge myself, to make it attended, to put my own name where the absent V-hewn hands had been, and take the charge onto me, so that the cradle was no longer a wish adrift but a vessel under a living surveyor's active hold. And the authority had a lever for exactly that, because the authority thinks of everything, and the lever was my license. I'm invoking custodial charge, I said. Surveyor's standing custodial hold on a living vessel in my lane. It's in your own regulations. A surveyor may take active custody of a vessel under charge to prevent the loss of the charge, and while he holds it, the vessel is not drift and cannot be reclaimed. I'm invoking it. I'm attending the charge, personally, effective from the moment I brought her through the seals. Custodial hold binds the surveyor's license to the vessel, the adjudicator said. The license becomes the anchor of record. If the hold is ever broken, if you leave the sill, transfer, retire, or lose the license by any means, the charge lapses and the vessel reverts to drift status and is reclaimed. You would be binding your standing here permanently to the continuation of this charge. The authority notes that this is not customarily done for cross-lane matter. I know what it costs, I said. Bind it. You would forfeit the ability to leave your post. I've kept this post 30 years and never once wanted to leave it, I said. Now I've got a reason to stay. Bind it. You understand, the instrument said, and I swear there was something almost careful in it now, though I know that is only a man hearing what he needs to hear, that you are anchoring the whole of your remaining standing to a V-hewn child the authority assesses as non-viable. If the assessment is correct, if she does not survive, the charge lapses regardless, and you will have spent your license for nothing. I looked down at Wren. She had woken, somewhere in all of it, and she was watching the channel light with her enormous amber eyes, and one of her small hands had found my collar and closed on it, the way she did, the way that said without any words at all that as far as she was concerned the matter of who attended her charge had been settled days ago and did not require an authority's finding. She's not non-viable, I said. Your number said 99 of 100. I'm the 100th. I've been the 100th this whole time and never got to prove it. She came up my lane with the light on. Every other version of this that ever happened, the light was out and I let her go and I felt her go and I got colder. This is the one where it's still burning. I am not going to be the man who logs it and lets it drift. Not in this world. Not the one time it's still possible. My voice was not steady and I did not try to make it steady. Bind it. Anchor my license to her. If she lives, I never leave this post and I don't care. If she dies, she won't, but if she does, then I spent everything I had left on the one chance the drift ever gave me to not do this the same way again. And that is the best thing I will ever have done, and you can strike my name off whatever you like. Bind it. The drift went by the port. Somewhere a half step over, 100 tired men who had never gotten this far leaned in through me and held their breath. Custodial charge is recognized, the adjudicator said. The vessel is under active surveyor's hold and is not drift. The reclamation writ does not reach a vessel under charge. The writ is void. I did not say anything. I could not just then. The surveyor's license is bound to the charge as anchor of record, it went on, in its flat and careful voice. The finding will stand as the authority's own. The courier will withdraw. And it did. That is the part nobody who has not lived it will believe, that there is no army in it, no fleet coming up the lane, no last stand at the seals. There is a man on a dead comet with a child asleep against his chest, and a legal engine that has heard him out and found that the cold table it serves does not, after all, reach as far as he needed it not to reach. The drones undocked. The authority beacons dimmed and slid back down the lane and were gone into the drift. And the drift closed over them the way it closes over everything. And the sill was quiet again. One pressurized ring bolted to a black stone at the edge of the worlds, and mine and hers, and no longer anyone else's to reclaim. Wren lived. I will not pretend it was easy or quick, because it was neither, and a man who tells you the hard part ends when the enemy withdraws has never had to do the years that come after. She was a long time getting strong. Vihun children grow slow and strange, and there was no one within 1,000 worlds to tell me how, and I got a great deal of it wrong and had to learn it the way I learned the cradle's seal, slowly, listening, feeling for the give. There were bad stretches. There was a season early where she stopped taking the green broth and drew inward and went to the still place and would not come up out of it, and I sat with her through the whole of it, days of it, holding the warm against her and making the low sound, not knowing if I was watching her fade after all, if the cold table had been right and I had spent everything for nothing. It was the worst waiting of my life, and I had done a great deal of waiting. And then one morning she took the cup again, both small hands around it, watching me over the rim, and I turned away so she would not see a grown man's face do what it did, and that was that. She came up. She kept coming up. Whatever the Vihun are made of, it is made to endure, and she endured. But she grew. She learned the curve of the deck, and then she learned to run it, one hand off the wall and then no hands at all, and I would hear her small feet going around the ring in the night, and it was the best sound I ever heard in 30 years of listening to the drift. She grew into the station until it was hers as much as mine, until I could no longer imagine the shape of the quiet before her, until the silence with 2 heartbeats in it was simply the silence. And the old 1 heartbeat kind was a thing I could barely remember and did not want to. She learned the work. That surprised me, though it should not have. She would climb up beside me at the mast and watch the returns come in, and she learned to read a drift signature before she could well form the human words for what she was reading, and she had a patience for the seam logs that I had never had, a stillness that let her sit with the dry data until it spoke. She read the neighboring worlds better than I did in the end, though she could not feel them the way I could. She read them the way you read anything, with attention, which is its own kind of feeling and maybe the truer kind. She learned words in time. Mine and some of her own that came up out of her from somewhere, the Vihun sounds, cold and soft, that I never fully learned but came to love the shape of. She learned my name. She learned hers, the one I gave her, Wren, and she took it as her own, and never knew it had been a bird in a garden on a world that was gone. She stood at the port with me and watched the drift go by, her amber eyes tracking the slow tumble of the dead things sliding down the lane, and once, when she was old enough to ask, she asked me what they were, all those pieces going past in the dark. Things that got lost, I told her, a long way from home. She thought about that the way she thought about everything, slow and complete. Not me, she said. No, I said, not you. Here is the thing I understood at the end, that I did not understand at the beginning, and it is the only wisdom I have to give you, and I give it plainly. I used to think the curse of feeling the other worlds was the grief of it, feeling all those versions of yourself fail, over and over, feeling the same loss come around and around the lane. And it is that. But it is also the other thing, and the other thing is bigger. Because a man who can feel the 99 is the only man who can stand in front of the cold table and say, I know what always happens. I have lived what always happens, and I am telling you it does not have to happen here. The authorities' whole power was the number, 99 of 100. It always ends this way. That is the sentence the drift teaches you, out at the seam, world after world. It always ends this way, so let it, so log it, so let it go by. And it is true. It is nearly always true. But nearly always is not always, and a human being is the animal that will burn everything he has left on the difference. I had felt myself do the easy thing 100 times. I knew it in my body, the shape of the surrender, the small cold click of logging a light that had gone out. And knowing it, being the one man in all those worlds who had to feel it every single time, was exactly what made me unable to do it the one time it could still go the other way. That is what I learned in the world where the light was still on. Not that a man can save everything. He can't. 99 of them I couldn't. But that a man who has failed at a thing across 100 worlds and felt every failure is not thereby taught to accept it. He is taught the opposite. He is taught the exact and unbearable weight of what it costs to let it happen. And so, on the one occasion the drift ever hands him the chance, he will spend his whole standing, his post, his license, the rest of his life clamped to a dead comet and count it cheap to not be that man one more time. She is grown now, or what passes for grown among her slow, cold people, and she keeps the sill with me and reads the seam logs better than I ever did. And when the day comes that I cannot keep this post any longer, she will not be drift, because she will hold the charge herself, and the light will still be on. 100 worlds I buried this child. In this one I did not. That is the whole of what a human is in the end, if you want it in one line. Not that we always win. That we remember exactly what it costs to lose and refuse when we finally can to pay it twice.